Welcome to our new venue. Please, I'll do my best to adjust. Bob, as usual, is going to help me try to see where hands are in the air. I think Laura has shared with everyone that everybody's mic will remain hot and live. I think Dave or Blair's got a bit of an issue, but they know how to work that. We're not live, okay? So this is recorded just like we were at the Civic Center, so we're not live on PAC 14. That'll be later. Tony Sarbanes is joining us via Zoom. Tony had dental procedure done today, and we all sympathize and empathize with him. Tony, the condition of joining us Zoom is that he can't talk back, and he'll just be listening. He just wanted to listen.
What a relief.
He can't talk back, meaning it would be problematic. So he knows. And so welcome, Tony. I know you can see us. And Sharon Morris is unable to join us tonight, and let's keep a good thought. Sharon is not here. Her mother-in-law passed away, and so let's keep a good thought for Sharon and her husband Ray as they deal with the loss of Ray's mom and her mother-in-law. So she sends her regards, and Sharon is such good people that she even sent me an email about 4 o'clock in the midst of dealing with all that she's dealing with. So Sharon, we just want to let you know, obviously, that we're thinking about you. To the group, I apologize. I've had a cold for a week, so I'll do the best I can to cough this way when I have to cough. And other than that, we're going to do this meeting the way we normally do it, except tonight we have the privilege and honor, truly. Dave Hanlon, we all know Dave. Dave has done a lot of this kind of work in a previous life when he was in Washington County. And during that time, he got the opportunity to develop a friendship with Walter Olson. And Walter is a pretty distinguished guy, and we're privileged to have him here. Walter chaired the Frederick County Charter Review Committee, and you may all recall that Member, I apologize. Please leave. We only want chairs in the room. Kidding. Walter was a member, and Dave was kind enough to share that. And I'm just going to read a little bit about Walter because, again, pretty high-caliber person we've got here. Earlier today, I attended an event that the Salisbury Area Chamber of Commerce held. It was regarding the Governor Hogan's Redistricting Commission, and Walter is a member of that. So allow me just a little bit. Is he? Oh, okay. See, you got promoted on that one. See, those little county things really don't matter. It's when you go statewide. Governor Hogan in January issued an executive order that established the Maryland Citizens Redistricting Commission. The assignment is to redraw congressional as well as General Assembly district maps that will guide representation of legislative officials for the next decade. Many of those assignments will be courtesy of the work of the census, and of course Sonia Whited was the co-chair of our census effort here in Salisbury and Wicomico. Walter is the co-chair of the Maryland Redistricting Commission. He is a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, certainly one of the best-known think tanks in Washington, D.C. Walter is an author. He's testified in Congress before, written several articles, published in little-known things as the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times. His work on tort reform has often been discussed in the press and has been cited in court opinions, and he has written extensively about redistricting and gerrymandering. In 2015, that's probably not the right date, he was appointed by Governor Hogan as the co-chair of the Redistricting Commission. So, Walter, welcome. Please come onto the podium. This is very informal. Walter has a few, just kind of prepared thoughts on how they did things a little bit in Frederick County, and I've let him know that that was a bit of our model, and we liked what we saw, and we're probably not doing it verbatim, but again, on the macro level, we liked what we saw. And this is an opportunity, as I told the group before, Any questions, any thoughts? Remember, we're about 6 meetings into this. Nobody is, certainly not me, is saying we're doing this perfectly, but we're certainly trying to do it as best we can. And if there's any thoughts that the committee, anybody might have on how Frederick did it or some of the ways that we're doing it and have any questions, don't hesitate. So with that, Walter, thank you for joining us and welcome.
Well, thank you, Mike, and to all of you for your hospitality. And it really does warm my heart to hear Frederick singled out for having done a good job on charter review, because I thought our process went very well. I thought we were collegial. We got things done and became friends with each other personally and made the most of our time. We wound up making 8 proposals to the county council, and I may mention their fate later on, but they were pretty well received. Wanted to start first as background. This was kind of the shakedown cruise for charter government in Frederick. It had only been adopted within the previous 10 years, so this was the first charter review effort. And as a shakedown cruise, in some ways it simplified our task, because the voters had supported the introduction of charter. We didn't see our mission as being to rethink anything major, because that vote was too recent. We were instead going to fine-tune things that had not worked out quite as hoped, or that they, in some cases, hadn't had time to get around to resolving when they actually wrote the original charter that the voters proposed. And the proposals came in. I don't know how many you have gotten from citizens of Wicomico County, but we were inundated with dozens and dozens and dozens, not just from I see smiles there, so I'm not surprised. Many of them, of course, from players like members of the council, the county executive, who had several, and the agencies and administration of Frederick County. Of course, we more or less took everything seriously that came from any of the sources like that. Lots of ideas from the public, some of which were extremely good, others of which were impractical in ways that I may talk about in a minute. But we settled down to a 2-stage method of dealing with them. Rather than have a full debate about all of them, we would announce in the agenda which ones we were taking up, and I believe we followed exactly the same process as you are, which is start at the beginning of the document and where a change occurred. And that way we were able to group together all of the stuff related to budgets and all of the stuff related to elections, and not have to re-educate ourselves at what might be 7 weeks later as to the things, do all of the relevant homework at the same time. So that made total sense. But we had that preliminary discussion of the proposals that came in, and then we voted on whether to court workshop them. And of the 7 of us, it took 3 to promote it to workshop. So our county council, and as a result, our Charter Review Commission, because it was 1 appointee per member of the council, no appointees from Jan Gardner, because that's the way the charter worked. But we were split 4 to 3 in a partisan way. That particular provision meant that the 3, if they felt strongly about something, could get something promoted to so-called workshopping, which simply meant more elaborate, prepared debate announced to the public a little more carefully. And we found that that 2-step system worked very well. There were a lot of things that we could screen out by not sending them to workshop. We could delay some things until we knew more about them before deciding. We were able to give at least some discussion to everyone's, but not to try to allocate an hour to everyone's or half an evening. And then when it went to the full committee for workshop at a later meeting, someone would be asked or pressured to volunteer as what we called floor leader. Sure. And for the floor leader was not necessarily someone in favor of the proposal. Indeed, I remember with one of the proposals from our county executive, I couldn't decide whether I supported it or not, but I was happy to be the floor leader because no one had decided what they could think of it. And the role of the floor leader was to do all the homework that seemed relevant, be prepared to answer any questions, be prepared to give a presentation that did justice to the best case for and the best case against, with the most relevant points in both directions. And I have to say, I thought that everyone and we traded off, and with 7 people and umpteen proposals, we had to do this multiple times. But I do think that all of our members acquitted themselves very well, both as far as the impartial way in which they didn't try to sabotage proposals, and the doing of their homework. And without that, I think we would have been in a lot of trouble, because it would have been too easy, especially on the complicated or boring things, for everyone to assume someone else would do the homework. This way there was responsibility, and someone was well prepared. Let me talk a little about timing issues, because these were things that surprised me a little bit as a first-timer. Indeed, we were almost all first-timers, although one of us had audited the meetings that led to the adoption of county government. But there were, for example, good ideas that we recognized as ideas that would probably have commanded a majority, but simply could not be staffed out in the time needed to make our recommendations. And even though the county administration staff was extremely helpful, I can't possibly fault them, there are some things. For example, someone proposed having a county ombudsman. Probably a majority for that idea, until someone warned that the school system had just gotten an ombudsman, and it had taken like 2 solid years to work out all the legalities of how the and we realized there's no way. We may like this idea in principle, but whoever likes one of these ideas needs to start like a year or 2 before, maybe 2 years before charter review process begins, or else it's just too late for some of the more complicated ideas, even if they're good. So too late for you to know, just as it was too late for us to realize. But when you are giving people advice in the future, tell them that unless the idea is coming from someone who has had a big chance to work out, unless the idea is either simple or has been staffed out by someone who's been able to do a lot of research in legalities, urge them to start early, because a bunch of ideas fell by the wayside for that reason. A second thing about timing that I realized was that, well, as a matter of fact, our county executive pulled me aside at a charity dinner and knew she only had a minute or 2 to give me advice, and said, please don't send us 12 proposals. It ruins the ballot. It means that people can get mad at one thing and drag down all of the others if there are lots and lots of things on the ballot. And we took that to heart, I think. We realized as we went along that there's an attention budget, just as there are financial budgets, that we couldn't impose on the voters for too much attention, or for that matter on ourselves. And so things that were really at the margin, that seemed like they were probably just barely better than even as ideas, it was a reason to cut them. We wanted to keep that attention budget tight. And I realized afterward, in what the county council did with ours, that there was a little bit of slippage or leeway, which they weren't telling us about, which is we sent our 8 proposals to the county council, and there was one other that we voted down as a commission, but which was a good proposal, and which they took up and adopted as their own anyway. But the head of the county council knew something that I hadn't seen coming, which is that they don't all have to put them on the ballot the same year. So she went through. She spotted one that didn't have to be done for several years, and said, perfect proposal, not going to put it on this year because it can wait. She spotted, I'm not going to attribute this all to her, it may be someone else's thinking as well, but of the 8 proposals that they were left with, a much smaller number went to this year's ballot, and in particular, they held back a couple of the hot-button, bomb with a short fuse, things that could send the public absolutely bananas in divisive sort of debate. All those were held back, so that the ones for which there's a pretty substantial consensus across all the points of view, I believe are mostly the ones that are going to be voted on earlier. Again, that's a shrewd way of doing it, but of course, different county councils may behave differently. Sure. I think that it was smart, particularly for that reason of you get one unpopular proposal and you can have people turn out to the polls saying vote no on everything. Right. That really is a way that people campaign when a flashpoint type of proposal winds up being placed on the ballot. So all things to think about.
Interesting.
This is, I was part of it. I call it test tube constitutionalism, because I had been reading the civics books about balance of powers between executive and legislative. I had been reading about the role of a constitution in restraining people who can be pretty willful. I've heard stories about Wicomico County, even, believe it or not, that not everyone necessarily does the things that the charter instructs them to do. And we have that in Frederick County, too, because we have human nature in Frederick County. And so this is constitutionalism hitting the road. And I was very proud of the whole American system. And I hope that your work will lead you to be just as proud that we were able to make rules that lived up to the spirit of constitutions. So thanks. Happy to yield to questions.
Very, very interesting, at least from where I'm sitting. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions? I do, but I will yield to Blair. I think, no? Walter, I'll ask, when you talk about the attention budget and I take it the county council president made the recommendation to hold off some of your recommendations of the committee and do some of them this year. Was she then implying that those that were not put on a ballot in the year you presented it would then be put on the ballot in subsequent years, or it was just sort of?
Do poker players tell you whether they're going to play the card?
Okay.
This is simply, there was no action taken this year,
Right.
but it is very much in the spirit of the charter review process to give the council that flexibility
Right.
and not expect them to all forward them, even if they like the ideas. And again, if she needed a reason, and I haven't had a chance to have a long conversation with her, but if she needed a reason, she could just say 4 is the right number for voter attention. That's about as much as people can assimilate and feel that they're understanding each of the initiatives rather than skipping the homework.
And I guess one of the questions I might ask, and you alluded to hearing a little bit about Wicomico County, and so we have in front of us approximately 30 recommendations that over the course of the last several years, if a charter question came up during the county council meeting, whether it be by the county council or the county executive, they would turn to Laura, who's such a wonderful job as council administrator, and say, hey, maybe the Charter Review Committee should look into that. So we have their list here. And one of the things that is obviously a challenge for us, as you were speaking, you made a total of 8 proposals to send forward. We're, just for the group's purposes, I think, again, we're meeting number 6 or 7, I've lost track. We have 13 proposals so far. As I shared with you earlier today, Walter, the group is going to circle back. We're going to try to get through this all. Then it seems to me what I'm hearing is that maybe the group has to consciously understand that putting too many things, the attention budget, it's a real factor. Can you talk about that, where you as the commission in Frederick realized, and we've talked about it here too, that we can't have a voter looking at 21 charter amendments because there's just only so much time someone can spend in a voting booth?
Let me give a few examples of how that worked. One of them is that by the time they shot down my pet proposal, I was much more accepting of that because I realized that it wasn't just considered in isolation, it was in competition with ideas that were more fully fleshed out and more obviously practical. So what we spent a lot of time on some demands for the public for things that we all eventually, it took a while to work through this. The charter review process was not the appropriate place for addressing them. In particular, Frederick has tensions between its sheriff's office, independently elected sheriff, and a large political community that is highly critical of the sheriff. And they showed up meeting after meeting, 3-minute speech after 3-minute speech in groups as like 6 or 8. And whatever we had talked about that evening, they only wanted to talk about the sheriff's office and the need to pull the chain on the sheriff's office. And so it took us a while to get a full consensus because some of us were more sympathetic than others to the idea that simply allowing civic discussion, even if we were not the right eventual actors to deal with it, that the civic discussion allowed people to have their say and blow off steam. I was perhaps a little bit more of a, could we please get on to the things that we have to do? But even so, it's there is a legitimacy to allowing proposals destined to fail to have their say and have their advocates talk themselves out. In our eventual final report and recommendations, and I was officially on the minority side. As a Republican, I was among the 3 rather than the 4, but I volunteered for the task of writing up the section of the report on the things we did not adopt, just because I have that negative kind of personality. And it was, and there were lots of reasons, but there were also some things that, as I say, left me proud of the process. And I'll tell you the format that those sometimes took, which is that people came to us from the county council or sometimes from the administration, and they said, here is something that has been making our work life very frustrating for years since charter. We think the charter needs to be changed. And we had that discussion back and forth about, have you tried, in one case it was redefining what a term meant in the county's reporting. In another case it was getting people to meet and work on something. But in, I think, at least 3 instances, it all resolved in consensus when they said, wait a minute, we don't need charter reform to do that. There are ways within existing charter to, even if a little bit roundabout ways, to get what we wanted done and end that particular frustration. And I felt part of the process because charter review should be used sparingly. I never wanted to invoke the old joke I heard in grade school about someone who goes into a library and asks for a copy of the French Constitution, and the librarian says, "I'm sorry, but we don't stock periodicals." You don't want the charter to keep changing in incomprehensible ways. You want that continuity, if at all possible. And so I loved the workarounds in which the practical problem of the people who had to administer the government could find a fix that didn't involve the language of the charter.
Yeah. Yes, Bob, please. Yes, sir.
Mr. Olson, I have 2 matters. One, I think, is relatively simple. That we're fortunate enough that we have a retired political science professor, Harry Basehart from Salisbury University, who has volunteered to make suggestions for districting, redistricting. And since that's where you're coming from the state, if he has questions or if there are issues that come up with regard to that, is that something that you would be willing to talk to him about or talk to us about?
Do have him call me. If there is some conflict, and it probably wouldn't be a conflict with my duties for the State Commission, but I would warn him and say I can't talk about thus and such. The State Commission requires me not to think about things like partisan registration or voting histories, because that's what's in Governor Hogan's order, is we have to insulate ourselves from politics. But most redistricting issues aren't that, and most of them, of course, I'd be happy to talk to them.
It just might be helpful for him if he had questions or suggestions. The other thing is perhaps a little more controversial, and it relates to what you kind of maybe insinuated. But one of the problems that continually comes up is an issue that relates to a thought that that a former county executive may have violated the charter, and that there is no provision to deal with a situation when the county executive or someone else violates a charter provision. And there's been suggestions that perhaps we could adopt some language to deal with that. And I didn't know whether you had any discussion about those sorts of things in Frederick County, and if you did, if you might have any thoughts or suggestions in that area that might be helpful to us.
We did indeed have discussions about a couple of proposals on that, and I wish I could be more encouraging and say that there's an easy solution, because we looked for what might be a solution, and and in fact, I was the floor leader. Our county executive pointed out that the language in the charter on working full-time was not that. It was possible that there were people who were not going to respect the spirit of that language, and it was not all that clear what the letter of the language was. And so she said, is it possible to tighten that up a little more specifically? And in particular, since the charter had breezed along by not saying what sort of sanctions there might be for violating itself, could we come up with what would be the appropriate sanction as something as extreme as removing the county executive from office, or something as mild as please pay a $50 fine? Now, you notice that, it's once the Charter Review Commission is dissolved, it's not as if it can be the judge in the case. I was the floor leader on that one. Started out reasonably sympathetic and got more and more frustrated as I looked at what other counties had done, the difficulties that other counties had faced, the limited range of sanctions. Now, at one level, you can build in a thing saying that the county council can declare the county executive to be in violation, and if you want to be, wholehearted about it, you can say, and then declare the county executive seat vacant. That is something that can be done under some counties' charters, under some types of misconduct. But of course, it's also an enormous hammer to bring down on when you may want to fly swatter instead. I suggested that notice and cure, to use the legal jargon of, we notice, Mr. or Ms. County Executive, that you're spending, 25 hours a week on your gift wrapping business. Could you please finish this up within 90 days? And if it isn't finished up within 90 days, then the hammer comes down. But even beyond that, defining the misconduct was surprisingly hard. What happens when someone is taking a leave of absence because they've got a family emergency? What happens if someone is inevitably drawn into, having to respond if they own a rental property and what they expect to be a small responsibility, begins taking weekends? It was hard to know when it was deliberately being violated. And of course, when you get to other misconduct by county executives, sometimes you wind up with the same things. Looking at constitutionalist answers in general, I think that because courts are probably not going to give you what you want on a lot of this, empowering the county council to, with a couple of possible sanctions, very carefully, because the downside, of course, is that a county executive whose sins have been very minor or non-existent could happen to have antagonized you always want a supermajority for this sort of thing. As far as I can see, everywhere that it's used, they demand a supermajority on the county council. But sometimes you have a supermajority that is feeling its oats and is going to take a minor grievance and try to throw out or at least bloody in the nose of a county executive, and that's a real danger. So I didn't see any perfect solution. We wound up going ahead without making a recommendation in that area, although acknowledging that the county executive had a point that it could be a problem.
Did you all come to a conclusion? For instance, if you had a supermajority and declared there to be a violation, did there have to be a hearing process of some sort? Did you think that?
I don't think we got into that. And again, the council almost inevitably is going to be master of its own procedures and is, I would hope, not going to want to do something very drastic without the show of fairness and being heard and the like. I would also hope that in practice, it would not act unless a situation had dragged on. That's why I mentioned notice and cure. There's almost nothing that a county executive could do that would be so bad as, rather, let me take that back, that county executives do in practice would be bad enough to want to get rid of them within a week. However, they do quite a few things that where you want to fix the thing, because if they went on doing that throughout a lot of their term, the county would face lots of problems. So, I don't have that killer language or suggestion. I think that to the extent that it is that there's been a record of misconduct by county executives, county councils are reasonable to want to expand their own power in some way. But what that way is, I'm not sure.
Do you have any recollection of having found a county that had a provision that even remotely looked acceptable?
It's been a while, and Part of our briefing book was the charter of all of the different counties with charter government, and I remember as floor leader looking through how each county handled it. There was a wide range of them. No one seemed to have spent a lot of time thinking through procedures, and I suspect that the origin of each clause was sometimes historically contingent of memory of someone locally trying to try something. I mean, that's actually how a lot of constitutionalism develops. Is that someone tries to pull something outrageous, and then constitutional language results. But I didn't know the backstory of any of those things and why the counties were different in the ways they were different.
Personally, I was just hoping not to have to recreate the wheel.
Sure, yeah.
Well,
If there was somebody out there that.
Look at those other charters. I
Yeah.
think you'll find that there's an array of different things that, a lot of what's in and not in charters winds up being almost luck. Frederick based our charter on Cecil County, and so if a good idea was not in the Cecil County charter, it probably didn't get into our charter. And likewise, and I'm not going to name any names, but there are things that were not in the Frederick County Charter because they ran out of time. And it can be as simple as that, why one county has a more elaborate way of dealing with something, and another county, it's so rudimentary that you wonder how they can even use it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Other thoughts or comments? Yes, Julie, please.
The timeline for the redistricting, we have about, 7 months left here, and we were
We were talking about that today,
talking about how the timeline of the Governor's Commission versus ours. We don't want to wait if there's no way that there's going to be any kind of direction coming out of the governors in 7 months. And the versus census releases. Do you have any insight on that?
Oh, I have much too much information about that. But no, seriously. And let me start by advertising our own processes because, and I'll get to the county issues in a moment, but we at the Maryland Citizens Redistricting Commission just finished up our 5 preliminary meetings and are about to begin the first series of public events, which we call a listening tour, 8 ones, each geared to a region around Maryland. The first one in the series is going to be next Wednesday evening, I think at 6, and it's going to focus on the Eastern Shore. Just by chance, the Eastern Shore was the first area to get one of these things. So please, please, please consider telling all of your friends to tune in to Zoom. David will have the Zoom link, but I hope the Zoom link will be widely spread. It's a week from Wednesday, so less than a week. And that will be followed by 2 further groups of hearings, one when the census data is finally available, and then after we propose maps, we will have a further series of hearings for the public to comment on maps. Now back to the county issue. The county, in exactly the same way as the MCRC, needs to draw on census data, and it can't really do anything that it knows to be final until that final data arrives. And it's complicated, but the county redistricting person is probably talking to Secretary McCord at Maryland Department of Planning, the same as we are, and he's probably telling us exactly the same thing, which is as follows: that corrected and final data won't be along until way into September probably, which is going to turn a task which would normally you'd have 8 months or so to do. It's going to squeeze that task into a much shorter time, both for people doing county council districts and for us. Now, the question is, can you use approximations of data to sketch out what you really intend to do, and then tinker a little bit once the final numbers come. Now, there is a bit of a difference of opinion on this. I'll tell you my point of view, which is that, yes, to avoid the crazy amount of work, you need to do these things through as approximate districting plans to the extent you can, even though you know the numbers aren't perfect. Use the best estimates available, and get some of the arguments in concept out of the way about where the districts should be, and then once you've got the final census numbers, tinker at the margins to make sure the districts have the equal population that you need if they've fallen out of that. But Secretary McCord argues persuasively for a more cautious approach of not trying to do too much with inaccurate preliminary estimate data, because for one thing, the state's software cannot handle it. It cannot be plugged into the state's software effectively. For example, our process of public map submission, in which we invite the public to be part of the process by submitting maps either of part of the state or of the whole state, they will not turn the switch for that until the actual definite reliable numbers are available. I don't know whether it breaks the machine or what, but they won't. And so what Secretary McCord has said, I think, and I hope I'm doing it justice here, is you can try the other thing, but you're on your own. And planning will step in with full staffing help once we feel that that we can give you genuinely accurate staffing on that. It's you have what, 7 districts, or 5 plus 2 at large?
Yes.
So for 5 districts, what I call a concept map, or a map for discussion purposes, knowing that it's not going to be 100% down to each precinct, should, I would think, be highly doable with the data available from the American Community Survey. This is the federal data series. Now, the problem at the moment is that the ACS data allows for quite good forecasting down to the county level, which is why we know that to a pretty certain level which counties have grown or shrunk and by what extent in population. ACS begins to disintegrate a little more when you move down to super local things. They simply don't sample enough people to know. This is a matter of some tens of thousands at any rate, not trying to sample everyone the way the real census does. But so it gets less and less reliable as you move down to the sub-county level. So be aware of that, and therefore the jump from the assumed estimated numbers to the actual ones is going to be a bigger jump if you've been using the ACS numbers. But they're there. No one can stop you from using them.
They're there now.
True that.
Thank you.
Well, anyone else? I will remind everybody that one of the things they did, I like the workshopping it. That was a few weeks ago, we talked about the possibility of tasking the committee to kind of look up things like personnel, and language, and duties of the EC. And they workshopped it, right? So they had, Walter, correct me if I'm wrong, whether you were for whatever was workshopped or not, as the floor leader, your job and your responsibility was to find as much information about both sides of the argument and then simply present that. Okay, thank you.
One thing I forgot to mention, this is the document, the spreadsheet that would change every week, or sometimes more often than once a week. And red lines indicate things that were definitely killed. Green lines indicate things that were still alive. I know it's dramatic, but the spreadsheet was helpful because you never know when late in the process someone will come in with a proposal on one of the early items that you thought you had already addressed that part of the charter. So the spreadsheet can accommodate new items, which I think were yellow or something, and it simply provides the single easiest way to both to keep track of our own work and to quickly explain our work to those who may ask about it. So you may already be doing something like this.
It's good to know we came up with that idea. We have a running scorecard too, because again, we did that just last meeting. We spent a half hour on an issue that we had decided the meeting before it was finally reminded. Walter, truly, thank you very, very much for the opportunity to still be a resource for us as needed. Thanks for the work you're doing on behalf of the citizens of the state of Maryland as we figure out how to redistrict. And thanks for being one of the, we're all well-paid volunteers, right, for this. So I really appreciate all the time and your expertise and coming down and visiting us today. And Dave, thank you very much for arranging this. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. You are welcome to stay and listen to the mundane work of the charter review, or you're welcome to go wherever Dave is taking you for dinner.
They have plans for me.
Absolutely. So,
We have reservations at Mogan's.
absolutely. Good. So,
Good idea.
that's right. So, thank you, gentlemen, truly. Thanks so much for being here. Safe travels back, Walter. We really appreciate it. Yes, sir. Thank you. And with that, folks, we will now, I stepped a little out of order, and I apologize for that. We'll go to the approval of the agenda, and Walter was the third thing on the agenda, so we've gotten that out of the way. So if there is a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Thank you, Matt. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Phil. Any discussion on the agenda? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That carries. Thank you. My apologies again to the group for failure to do things this way. Next on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from our May 20th meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
Approval.
Thank you, Phil. Is there a second?
Second.
Wayne, I think I heard that. First, any comments or changes to the minutes? Hearing none, we'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the May 20th minutes, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, that carries. Thank you. Well, again, now we're ahead of schedule for item number 3 is already completed. Stepping up now to the first real item on tonight's agenda is the review of Charter Section 406, and this is regarding the compensation of the county executive. Laura was kind enough to hand us this evening, it's in front of us, a review of the county executive salaries. There's also, she sent to us the review of the compensation committee from a few years ago. And where we were as a group, just to remind everyone, we were mid-vote on approving a charter change recommending the salary of the county executive be at a minimum of $120,000. And during that vote, Michelle threw a table out there, and we agreed as a group that what Michelle was requesting was a review of the other county executive salaries across the state. We now have that information in front of us, so I guess we'll resume that discussion, and Laura, I think, was kind enough to show how we sort of sidestepped in the middle of the vote, but to accommodate this. So let's get back to that question. The group was at a minimum salary of $120. One of the things that I did notice, and I was on that compensation review, I thought that was the number that we had recommended. It turns out the number that had been recommended by the Compensation Review Committee was a $130,000 a year compensation for the executive. So with that, Wayne, yes, sir.
Yeah, Mike, if I could, in thinking about this over the last 2 weeks, given that we utilize the CPIU index as the basis for our property tax revenue, I went back and looked at the migration of the CPIU from January 1, 2006 to April 30, 2021. And in looking at that, the CPIU grew 68.754. That's a 34.67% increase. That's an average of 2.3% a year. I think everybody here has probably already read that the past month, the CPIU has increased 3.6%. And I think we can anticipate, given the level of federal stimulus spending, that that migration northward is going to continue. But if you were to apply that 34.67% increase to the baseline of 85,000, you arrive at a figure of 114,470. To look at it a bit differently, if you take the $85,000 salary in 2006, it equates to buying power today of $55,530. So there's been significant erosion in the buying power that's afforded the county executive over this 15-year period that we've been in this form of government. So I just thought that might be helpful to the group in terms of their thought process on what, if anything, this group ought to recommend.
Thank you. Thanks for doing that homework. Did I hear a comment over there?
Yeah,
Michelle,
I'll make
yes,
a
please.
comment. Basically, when you did your salary review for the commission,
Yes.
you included the 4 big counties, which are Montgomery, Prince George's, Baltimore. You know, you included the big ones to come out with that average salary. And if you look at like counties, and we keep saying like counties, being Frederick and being Cecil, you're talking $95,000 in Cecil, or $98,000 in Cecil, $95,000 in Frederick, with a very large salary going to the administrator. Because basically, essentially, the administrator is the one that handles the budget, the finances, the staffing. And I guess, you know, I'm going to circle back to where I was before and say, if we're going to keep a county executive and we're going to keep that kind of pay, do we really want a county executive, or do we want an administrator and an assistant administrator? Someone that comes in with credentials that we can attract here, maybe even from somewhere else, pay a premium salary to these people, and have them do things that are going to help uplift this county. And a good administrator and a good assistant administrator could do that. And I just look and say, you know, I just can't see the salary increase.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Doug, yes, sir.
Who would that administrator work for?
That administrator would work for, they would be the executive branch. They would have, just like we used to when we used to have Matt Kramer, and you'd have an assistant for that person. And they would handle that side of it, and the other side would be your counsel.
If the council, would the council have to hire him? At that point, would he not work for the council?
That would be a good question, whether the council
So-
would hire him or whether,
So where we currently are, Michelle, is you're correct. When Mr. Kramer was the county administrator, he reported to the county council because we didn't have a county executive. So the current county administrator, please correct me if I'm wrong, former county administrator, reports and works for the county executive. So, and that's at will, is that correct? No. So the county executive would hire the administrator and hire the assistant administrator with the approval of the county council. So that's the current form of government that we have.
and what I'm saying is, would you not be better off with that situation where, when you had Mr. Kramer and an assistant to work with him, and that would be that branch of the government, and then your council would be over here, and you would not have an executive?
So again,
If you have an executive, it's very hard to put parameters on educational levels, et cetera. I mean, right now, there's no requirements other than you run and the people elect you.
Right.
I mean,
that's correct.
you know, and do we get the best for this county under that system? That's all I'm asking.
So respectfully, the question for tonight is the salary, because the group has already recommended that we keep the executive form of government. Again, we will, as we are with all things, we will come back. But the question on the table tonight is, does this committee wish to recommend that the salary of the county executive be at a different level than 85? And I understand your comments. Thank you. So we were voting for a motion that I believe Mr. Tillman, Phil had put on the table. Remember, I'm trying to keep everybody at a first name basis, whether that's right or wrong. I'm trying to be consistent. Phil, what I might ask, or anyone, because we're trying to follow Robert's rules, and by kind of suspending that to go get this research, I might ask if anybody wants to put a new motion on the table for consideration and to establish kind of a new motion, if anybody's interested in doing that.
We go back to the original motion that was
We
made?
can, the original motion where we were mid-vote was to have the county executive salary reset in section 406 on the first line to $120,000.
120,000.
120,000, no less than. Phil,
And
yes, sir.
reminding all of us that what we're doing is making a recommendation
Correct.
to the county council.
That's correct.
So if we tweak it by $10,000, I don't think it makes much difference. So I would reiterate my original motion that we set the minimum salary at 120,000.
Is there a second on the reiteration of that motion?
I would second that.
Thank you. Is there discussion on that motion now that it's on the floor? Yes, sir, Phil?
And this might be a little bit off subject,
Yes.
but in answer to Michelle's statement, I think, and I've been thinking a lot about this, once we get through tweaking the charter
Sure.
to try to make it work
Yes.
better, I think the discussion of whether or not we go forward with the county executive form of government or councilmanic form of government probably deserves some more discussion. I haven't changed my position on it, but I think we were pretty quick to vote 15-0, I think it was, that we weren't going to ask the county council to put that on the ballot, and that still might be what we decide. But I think we owe it to the public, and I think we owe it to this committee to spend more time on that discussion. And what Michelle just brought up is the basis of the discussion.
To recap for the group, the reason that was brought up at the very first meeting, at least the first meeting where we had a chair, not the first meeting, so I guess it was technically the second reason. There was a feeling among the group that that was, in a sense, the central question that needed to be answered before we went down this road of looking at the charter, because so many of the questions presented to us and that we would have to consider had to do with whether we had a county executive form of government. I'm just recapping for the group. So Phil, to answer your question, I will go back to what I'm consistently trying to say, is that as a group, we're going to, so far, we have approved 13 items that we have passed that we think should change. We just heard the chair of the, a member of the Frederick Charter Review Committee said they did a total of 8. So I think we will revisit and have another discussion on that question in the same way that we will have another discussion on all the other things that we're having discussions on. Does that address that? Okay. Catherine?
It is concerning to me that we voted that there wouldn't be additional credentials added for anyone running for office for county executive. That was troubling to me and concerning. It's also concerning to me that you cannot, and it was voted, that you cannot have another form of employment to offset the $85,000 salary. And so that's why I fully support, if we don't have additional credentials and if we don't let someone be employed elsewhere or have another means of monetary gain in some capacity, then $120,000 to find a qualified candidate. I mean, you're asking for them to give up any other employment that they've had thus far, then I think that's only at a minimum of $120,000.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. Other thoughts? Any other discussion? Julie?
I like the motion, but I did want to throw in that that's a big jump. And so I would hope that Wayne's math gets thrown in there specifically so that maybe we can get 114 if we can get 120. That's all.
And I'll remind you what Phil just said, that these are just, remember, everything that we do here is just a recommendation, and it will be part of our final work product that we'll present to the county council, and they can say yes or no to any single thing that we put forth in front of them. Matt, first, yes.
As I've looked at it and thought about it, my concern is similar to yours. But the reality is that if we're going to get qualified people to be willing to step up to the plate and take on a position like this, you need to have a fair and reasonable compensation, because in most cases,
these individuals are going to be stepping away from from their source of income. And most of us probably can't afford to step, backwards significantly just to be in a political office position. And I think that's, it happens. My wife was the mayor and worked for $5,000 for half of her time a year. And so it's, and so as far as we were concerned, it was a volunteer job.
Sure.
I mean, it was. And then she gets mad because I had her put so much of it in the 401K, but
Noted. Thank you, Matt. Sonia.
I was just going to say, just in the spirit of what was just mentioned, I forgot his name that quickly, thinking about the work.
Walter.
Walter, thank you. Thinking about the, I won't say work groups, and I'm also making up all kind of names. It's been a long day. But the work groups that we want to have affiliated with this for when we revisit it, because it's more than just this compensation. There's other
Yeah.
pieces when we're even talking about 114,000. There's other things when we talk about comparable counties and it's not quite that high. Now, that might have also been a few years ago before you did the calculation. But there's other things that I think that we need to work through and have that conversation when we revisit this. So I want to make sure that we capture that.
Yep. So that's the phrase you're looking for was workshop. So they workshopped it. So clearly, I'm going to put this on the table now. And Michelle, I'm going to get you in just a moment. Clearly, we're going to need to, let's borrow the phrase, workshop this. And we're going to need some volunteers or a volunteer to be, I like that floor leader concept, who goes out and does his or her homework and then reports back objectively. Michelle, I think I saw your hand in the air.
My comment was just for Matt. This is where I was coming back to saying maybe we need to have a hired position, not an elected position, where you can go through a person's credentials and find the best for this county. And I have no problem with a great salary for that, because I think they're going to be a benefit to the county.
Yep.
An elected official, and they're not really, they don't have qualifications or credentials behind them, and they're reliant on our Director of Administration anyway to get things done.
Well, noted. So we'll call for a vote unless there are any more discussions. The vote, we'll call for the vote on the motion to recommend a salary of $120,000 for the position of county executive. All those in favor, please say aye. 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 All those opposed?
No.
Okay, so that's,
just a point of clarification.
yes, sir?
The word is going to continue to be a minimum of,
Yes.
okay.
Okay, so that's, the motion carries, I think, I don't know, I can't do the math, there's two people missing. I think 12-1, thank you, is the motion. I'd like to welcome Wicomico Councilman Josh Hastings. Josh, thanks for joining us tonight. Okay, folks, we're now at section 407 in our, so 407, any thoughts or questions on that? 407A, 407B, 407C. I'm going to make a comment on this part of it. This came into play less than or about a year ago, and the attempt to have the county executive, who in our case had passed away, appointed and filled by resolution by a majority vote of the members of the county council within 45 days after the vacancy occurs, landed us in the position where today we have an acting county executive. The county council as a body did not fill the position within 45 days, and as a compromise, they recommended an acting county executive who, by the time the next election rolls around, the acting county executive will have been the acting county executive for the better part of 2.5 years of a 4-year term. one of the things I was going to throw out for consideration by the group is to, and again, I'm just throwing it out here, if the county executive vacates the office, and again, if the vacancy occurs during the first 12 months, I'm going to recommend that we do a special election for the next county executive. I would, for consideration, throw out the idea of, again, if this occurs, within the first 3 years of the term of the county executive, that a special election is held. And I was going to throw out the idea that if it happened in the last year of office, that the existing county administrator could be the acting county executive for that last 12 months or less. So I'm just suggesting that the charter, well-intentioned, it simply didn't work when it was put to the test less than a year ago, and the county council did not follow the charter. So why leave it up to the county council? Why don't we just do a special election? That's just an idea. I'll look for thoughts. Wayne?
You have a question, Mike?
Certainly.
So if we went with that concept, what period of time would you suggest be allotted for holding the
90,
special?
90 days. Apply within.
90 days, is 90 days long enough?
The way I was working it out in my brain, I know, I heard that.
What's that?
We all work things out in our brain, Michelle. Number one, what happened in Wicomico County last year probably didn't happen in 10 jurisdictions in the country where the county executive passed away while in office.
So my suggestion would be that we speak with Anthony Gutierrez, who's the head of our Board of Elections, and asked him what length of time would be reasonable to hold a special election. My second question would be, would that special election allow for Republicans, Democrats, and independents to run?
As I was working it out in my brain, the answer was yes.
And during the interim period, well, let's say it's 6 months, because that's kind of what popped up in my head, to have a good special election, would then the Director of Administration be appointed as the acting executive during that interim period?
They would assume the duties, yes.
Okay.
Or they would assume their regular duties, and we just simply wouldn't have a county executive.
Understand.
I see hands over here, yes.
Yeah, all right, one thing that would concern me, the 3 years makes good sense on one hand, but now you've got somebody who is stepping in. Let's say that by the time they go through all what we go through, and they step into office and they're sworn in 12, 13, 14 months before the next election. Now, should there be a provision that if it's inside a certain time frame, that then they finish the term and then and then go to the next 4 years?
Well, I'm always assuming that the special election would simply fill the term of the vacated term. And then if that person chose to run again at the end of that term, that would be up to that individual. Michelle?
I think it's a really good idea, but I think going for 3 years is too far. If, say, the executive gets run over by a truck in 2 years and 6 months, you're asking now people to run a campaign to get elected and maybe only be in term for 8 or 9 months, and then to go through the whole process again. So I guess I'm saying it's a great idea, but I think to go all the way out to, say, 3 years is just too far out.
Thank you. Sonia?
So what I'm sitting here searching for, there's paper for days. I feel like the trees are screaming at me. Didn't we have this conversation for timing with the council?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to find, I can't, my memory isn't that good. So, and part of the conversation, because Councilwoman Ackley
she
was
just went
talking
through
about this and, running. And so I'm trying to find where we ended up with that. Because I thought that, so I have it crossed out.
Yep.
But, yeah, so I had it crossed out, and I was like, did we actually delete that? So I guess I don't have a comparable piece, but it still takes things that we need to consider in mind, that if you take all that time to run, and I'm going to be in office for 3 months.
Yes, Sonia, because she's now doing another campaign.
Right. This is her
just
third,
got in office.
this is her third campaign, if you
Well,
will.
third
Yeah, no,
campaign,
that's right.
But I'm
That's
saying,
right.
it just is very hard for someone
Absolutely.
to garner funds and
I
get
will
going.
sort of remind everybody that, again, this doesn't happen very often, meaning somebody doesn't pass away in office. And by the way, it's just a suggestion, and we can move past it.
So in hearing what Michelle just said, I tend to agree with her. In thinking about it as we're all talking, I would suggest that we may want to modify that to the first 2 years as opposed to the first 3 years. I like the idea. I personally don't like the idea of a county council appointing an executive. I think there's a real imbalance in the balance of powers. In that case, I think our citizens deserve the opportunity to elect who they want to be executive, assuming that we agree that we want to continue with an executive form of government.
Well, again, for the purposes of how we move forward, we have to agree that for now, we have chosen to continue with the executive form of government, because otherwise, yeah.
Understand.
Okay. It's just a thought. We can keep rolling down here if we're okay with. The reason I was attempting to offer this as a solution is that Section 407B did not work less than 1 year ago. It literally did not work. The county council did not.
Actually, it did work. It didn't work well, in your
Okay,
opinion.
fair enough.
But it did work.
Fair enough.
We have somebody in the county executive's office right now. I think what you're suggesting, although it's, in theory, is a good idea, I think it overcomplicates. So a lot of what we're doing here with this charter is trying to change the charter in view of the fact that something didn't work well.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
No question.
And the idea that 3 candidates are put forward, hopefully good leading citizens, et cetera, and they serve out the term. And if they can't agree on that, then the administrative director, and that's our situation now. And I don't really have a problem with the current situation. So I'm falling down on leaving this the way it is.
And I might say to that point that just as this unique situation occurred last year, and as I interpret it, it didn't work very well or it failed, what are the chances that that very system again would fail again? Meaning, maybe another county council years down the road might, in fact, replace somebody within 45 days. And since we have a councilman here, Councilman Hastings, you're at the microphone, please. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you. And of course, thank everybody for here. Josh Hastings, Council District 4. I will say, I don't believe, I voted against John Pasota being in the current role. I've known John Pasota for 20 years, love him to death, but I did not want the situation to happen. We have an acting county executive to push back, Mr. Tillman. We did not do it because we were supposed to appoint a county executive, not an acting county executive. And so in my view, we failed as a council to do that. So as much as possible, I think it would be great to have a fair process where this could happen, where we could get I personally, I would be in favor of a special election. I don't know how it comes about. I think that's where we would need help and guidance from our elections office. But otherwise, I don't feel like we as a council did our position or did our job and actually put in a county executive. We put in acting. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Hands, yes, Sonia.
I kind of feel like this is something where if somebody else was talking, you'd say, are you going to put out a motion?
It would be, and I'm reluctant to put yes as the chair. Yes, that's correct.
Okay, got it.
Yep. If this, that's absolutely spot on. If this was happening, I would say, does anybody want to make a motion? So I guess I can, Bob, please.
Just a practical question.
Yes.
To use the workshop analogy that Mr. Olson discussed, are we taking the position that we have to vote on these things, and if we adopt it, we then might send it to workshop? Or is this something that we could decide that we want to have go to a workshop? Because I heard Mr. Strasburg say that in order to answer this question, we may want to have Mr. Gutierrez give us some information. And it might be helpful to have Mr. Gutierrez provide the information before we decide whether we're going to do this.
So I'm going to make a new verb, and we're going to call it workshopped. Yes, I believe this should be a workshop. If the committee wanted to go down that road, this could be a potential discussion to be workshopped, yes.
I'll make the motion that we workshop this
I'll second.
issue.
Okay, there's a motion to workshop, and we're going to need somebody to workshop it too, right? So we can't just workshop it. Somebody's going to have to volunteer to workshop it. There's a motion to workshop Section 407B and probably C because they're related. And there's a second discussion on workshopping.
I would just suggest that, if you're willing to, and I apologize, Mike, I don't mean this directed at you.
Oh, it's okay.
If you're willing, just in general, if we're going to proceed with the workshop, if you're going to bring something up as an item, be ready to be the person that workshops it.
And
Because you're asking for volunteers,
Dallas?
and you've asked for volunteers for several items, and we haven't gotten any. So I just think, we'll put a little skin in the game.
a good portion of my life doing a whole bunch of volunteer activities for a whole bunch of good causes.
And again, I don't mean that directing you at any
One
bad
of my
way.
axioms that I live by is if somebody comes up with a good idea, you turn and you say, okay, that's a good idea, now go do it. I accept your challenge, and if this motion passes, I will workshop it. The motion on the floor is to workshop 406 and 407, excuse me. And we've had discussion, and we have a workshop voluntold person who will workshop it. All those,
I'll help.
okay, thank you, Matt. All those in favor of this motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, we will workshop Section 407. Thank you all. Good discussion. I think that got us through 407. We're now at 408. Thoughts?
This was brought up in a question on number 12 on from the council. Removal of the executive office. Who makes the decision that the county executive is unable to perform the duties of office due to a physical or mental disability? This, and again, it's from the paper that
Thank you.
the council set out.
Go ahead, Wayne. I think I hear.
That opinion has to come from a medical professional.
So do we need to add that in there? I'm thinking back to Phil, and he makes a very valid point that, we can't tweak everything, but, yes, sir.
My question was, is this where you would add violation of the law or violation of the charter? That's what I thought we were going to discuss in this section, and if the county executive violates the charter.
I think that might be in 409 for forfeiture, because that's where it talks about convicted of a felony or crime involving
Yeah,
moral turpitude.
okay.
That might-
Well, I've got it written in the margin, and it covers both those, okay. You're right.
It would be my suggestion that you would just strike it by reason of physical or mental disability. So county executive is unable to perform the duties of office for a continuous period of 6 months. Because to define that is a huge umbrella
There is
of definitions. Correct.
I mean, that gets into all sorts of disability law and workman's comp and all of that sort of.
Sticky wicket.
Yeah, so if removing of physical or mental disability, you'd want to strike that is how you might resolve this.
I think it's just such a huge umbrella,
Okay.
and that could be used to target against a county executive, and then that might be in violation of ADA.
Right.
So let me ask this question. You're going to
Sure.
strike out unable by reason of physical or mental disability to perform his duties? You're going to strike out that part? Well,
Then it can just vote to remove somebody whenever they want without any reason. I mean, I think you need the
So, yeah.
physical, mental
qualifier.
disability, the qualifier. Otherwise, it's just like, yeah, we don't like you, we're voting.
I could say, I don't like his or her decisions over the last 6 months, and therefore, I think that that's reason to perform the duties of the office. I don't think you're performing the duties of the office because I don't like the decisions that you've made, to your point, Dallas.
Well, bear in mind, we had a governor who had a very serious bout with cancer.
We did.
He wasn't removed from office. We had a county executive who had a very, very, unfortunately,
Yes.
fatal bout with cancer. But I will tell you, from having been in the office, he was in communication with me every single day until perhaps the last 4 or 5 days of his life. So I think this is a very, I think if we are going to mess with this, that is a very slippery slope. And I'd like to know who would make the determination that a county executive was physically or mentally unable to carry out his or her duties.
And I might say that
Now, we do have
if there
medical
was
board.
if there was a time and a place for this clause to have gone into effect, it probably would have been last year, but it never was, it didn't go into effect. So if we had an example of when this could have happened last year, unfortunately, and this was not put into place, then when would it ever be put into place? Sonia?
But I'm sorry, what is your?
Wayne?
Wayne just said that he contacted him every day.
Correct.
So does that, just because you are ill, if you're actually talking to the office, that does not mean that you are not, that does not fulfill that sentence. So that's not, or Governor Hogan, or I'm sure that he was contacting people as well. So just because you're ill, whether it's mentally or physically, and not able to be in the office, almost like we were during this pandemic, if you're still doing your job, you're doing your job. So that's not a consideration. I don't disagree with your sentence, but I'm like, how does it just leaves it like a blanket sentence? It doesn't really mean anything. So this is also sticky, so I have no answer.
We could strike the entire thing. We could just get rid of it. I'm just talking out loud here. I mean, what, Julie?
How does, if a council person, how does that
You know,
remove? I know there's more than one, but how do we handle that?
it's funny you say that because in my notes, when I first read this months ago, where's the section on removal of a county council member? I wrote to myself. So if we have a section in the charter that says removal of the county executive from office, shouldn't we have a section that says removal of a county council person from office? I'm just talking out loud here. Why one and not the other?
And it's also too that, it says, the executive can appeal to the court, and the court shall make an independent determination on fact. I mean, it's, at that point, they're going to get the expert witness opinions and things like that. I feel like we're kind of covered.
That was kind
As it is.
Yeah, my reaction when I was reading it earlier was that I looked at it and said, pretty clear, why change?
Okay.
That was,
Well, I'll go back to, is there a motion?
I move that we leave it alone.
We don't need to do that. We don't need a motion to leave it alone. Okay, there's no motion. Let's move on to section 409. Section 410.
409 has a comment, also number 13.
Thank you, Dallas, for keeping track of that. Should this provision be expanded is the question that was being asked of us by the county council. I don't know what that,
I'm going to infer, Mike, that that relates to violation of the charter. I may be off base, but that's my guess.
okay, that's a fair guess, and we're wrestling unsuccessfully with that question, and our expert also has wrestled unsuccessfully with that question. So here is there, we'll move beyond 409 unless I hear anything different. Section 410. Section 411. Section 412. That is one of the questions. Thanks, Dallas. And one of the questions the council asked of the group regarding Section 412 was, should there be a residency requirement for the Director of Administration? That's about halfway through the paragraph. It says, and
There
shall
is.
continue to reside.
There is.
Where is that? Where,
I think the question is, should that residency requirement be removed?
oh, sorry. Okay,
There's currently a residency requirement in section.
thank you.
12.
Okay.
The question, as
Should it be
Ms.
removed?
Hurley says, is whether or not
Should there be one? Should it be removed? Thank you. Should it be removed?
Having been in that position, when you're responsible for the budget and you're spending taxpayers' dollars, I think you should be residing in the county where you're exercising that authority.
Also,
Yes, sir.
if you're potentially going to be the guy who takes his place.
You might want to live in the county.
Then we don't want somebody from Ocean City.
No.
As the acting
So
or
are
the
you-
permanent.
Publicly saying that Ocean City is a bad place? Is that what you just said? That I want to make sure for the record, you know I'm kidding, Phil. That's a great point. So we can leave as is? Okay, thank you. Section 413,
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion for this one,
all right?
or bring it up for discussion.
Okay.
We have the requirement that within 6 months, and this is the 413, the very bottom of the page, within 6 months after each election for the county, the executive, deputy director, department heads, deputy department heads all have to come up for reappointment. Number one, when you look through the other charters, and I looked through Frederick, Howard, Montgomery, PG, Anne Arundel, none of them have this requirement that after every election, they have to be reappointed. Most of them are actually, the ones I read, it's all just once you're appointed, and that's it. So it's not like you have to be reappointed every 4 years. I think most people are aware that we've had a lot of turnover in our department heads over the years, and we're having trouble recruiting people to take their place. And I can tell you from personal experience, this is one of the reasons. When you have to come up every 4 years, and you're never sure if you're going to get caught between the council and the executive, it's like, yeah, who wants to take on that stability when you got to feed a family, or that instability when you have to feed a family? So I would recommend that we remove it to say within 6 months after the initial election.
Initial appointment?
Yeah, initial appointment, rather. Thank you.
I think that's already in there.
It's already in there. See, the thing that I would point out to the group is that our department heads are unlike presidential cabinet members or governor's cabinet members. These are working, boots on the ground, hands on the wheel supervisors. And experiencing the kind of turnover that we've experienced in the past 6 years has led to incredible dysfunction. And when these folks, it's not uncommon in the state of Maryland that appointed officials like this are provided with employment contracts, where if they get caught up in political crossfires or whimsy, that they've got a severance package. And I will tell you that this is a real problem for this county now, given our history over the past 6 years. It's a real problem.
And just to be clear too, department heads are at will. Everybody understands that. We can be let go at any time.
For no reason whatsoever, other than if it violates your civil rights.
So let's do this.
No
Dallas,
reason whatsoever.
if you want to make a motion, let's put a motion on the table and then we'll have a discussion.
Okay, so I'm going to make a motion that we change that, I believe it is the second sentence, to say, within 6 months after the initial election for county executive, and so on and so forth. County executive shall appoint the director of administration, and so on.
And
Changing the word after each to after the initial election.
now I think if you'll turn to section 315, it literally talks about the initial appointment of the positions you're talking about.
Yeah, and we would have to revise that, I believe, also. It's going to affect both, if I've read it correctly.
I gave you some notes on that, and unfortunately, I didn't bring them with me. But to my way of thinking, whether it be a county executive who's new or reelected or whatever, those department heads, they serve at the will, but they don't have to go all the way back through the council every time. So once you're hired, once you've gone through that process, you've been appointed by the county exec, you've been vetted by the council has approved you, and you are now the director of whatever. You got that job subject to your performance, and if you don't perform, I mean, the council could basically go into the executive's office, and not collectively, but one of them, and say, wait a minute, Joe Schmo is not performing, and he hasn't been performing for months. You need to either address it or he needs to be terminated. Now, that doesn't mean that the council can force it, but it puts the executive on notice. But to me, it's once you've got the job, you should keep the job as long as you're performing.
Even between different elected executives?
Yes.
No, okay, and I agree with that. I think that's even better for stability. I'm
Yeah.
not sure how to word that.
Well, the whole concept there then would be that our department heads would not be at-will employees, they would be merited employees, and once confirmed, could only be removed for cause.
I don't think that's, the newly elected county executive could come in and basically say, I want all my department heads to submit their resignations, and I'm going to decide whether I'm keeping you or not keeping you.
Yeah.
I don't think it has to work that way. I mean, that's effectively what happens in the federal government.
It also happens in the Maryland state government. We have had friends that work at DNR or different divisions, and then once a governor's term is up, those people are out looking for jobs in appointed positions. It's just, it's the way it's done. But to Dallas's point, I see what turmoil it causes in running a county. So it's a real quagmire about what you do with it.
Dallas,
No problem.
might I suggest
Can Wayne clarify, why would they not be still at will? Or why couldn't they be?
Because I've seen people dismissed for reasons that were absolutely absurd. Had nothing to do with their performance. Nothing.
Okay, well then I guess does the executive have the right, if he doesn't particularly like somebody or work well with them, does he or she have the right to say, I really want my own person in for this position?
Yeah, they do now.
They do now.
But I'm saying it should be based on performance. It shouldn't be based on, I don't like the fact that you wear white socks today.
Do these need to be appointed positions? I mean, it's a perk, I know, for the executive coming in to be able to give out positions to people. But is it in the best interest of the county to have them be appointed positions?
Well,
I guess what I'm saying, if you've got somebody that's a director of a department and they're a department head, whatever, and they do an excellent job, why in the world would you come in with a new executive and sweep them out?
necessarily get swept out. They can just possibly.
Potential.
You know, I'll play it on
Julie?
the other side, that suppose you have someone that just does not support, the executive comes in and says, I think we should do X, and for whatever reason, one of the department heads just does not support it. You know, I can see where an executive would want his staff to support, his or her staff, their staff, sorry. The executives have their staff support them in moving forward. I mean, yeah, it's a fine hair to split to say, okay, yeah, how do you balance it between the tyrant that's, you didn't wear a tie today, you're gone, versus, you know, I really think we need a water main at the airport, and if you're not going to get on board with that, I'm going to find somebody that can.
I disagree with that.
And I do not have a solution there. I as a former director, I'm okay with at will. At will is most of government career. But I just think that eliminating that constantly going up
Sure.
was an issue for.
Bob?
Can somebody educate me as to why the deputy director is in the same position as?
That was a change that the council made. I didn't agree with it. I still don't agree with it because you break the continuity. The deputy director is supposed to be there for continuity of operations, and that got broken with one of the charter amendments that unfortunately got passed.
Do you have any insight as to why they did that?
No, I can't get inside that thinking, but maybe Laura can.
I'll just say that, kind of feeding off of what you just said, the department heads have to be confirmed by council. So if a department head were to leave, then the deputy director would fill those responsibilities. And so the thought process was that the initial appointment of the deputy directors, not that they would have to come back every 4 years to get reconfirmed, but just the initial appointment of a deputy director should be confirmed by council.
They would only fill that position until the director was
To a new director.
filled.
That could take a while. I mean,
Well, I understand
Oh, yeah,
it.
we had deputy directors filling the public works position for 6 years after
Right.
Rye left.
Exactly.
See, we have set ourselves up to literally vacate every senior position in the county every 4 years.
And
That is
that's what's
dangerous.
happened.
And that's happened.
So will you repeat,
And it's
now that
dangerous.
we're in this section, you said it at the last meeting, how many Wicomico County administrative people have left within the last 5 years?
31.
31 people.
So how do other counties handle this?
It's, what we have is not uncommon, Bob. And I guess I'll go back to something that I said on 2 meetings ago or whatever. A lot of this has to do with, we can sit and try to come up with a perfect construct and the perfect charter and the perfect organizational construct. Any organization rises or falls based on the quality of people in the organization. And we can't wordsmith that.
So,
Historically, I mean, in this county, this is not the way things happen
Had not been,
historically.
Correct.
no, not at all.
I mean, even when you had a county council form of government,
problem.
you could switch from Republican to Democrat to Republican to Democrat.
Yep.
But they didn't replace the direct, I mean, Kirk Banks was the county engineer for I don't know how many years. Raj Sharma was the county engineer for however many years.
Yes.
I've forgotten the gentleman's name that was the finance director forever.
Schiller.
Joe
Joe
Schiller.
Schiller.
Joe Schiller. I mean,
Schiller.
they didn't get changed. I mean, so the problem that we're dealing here, with all due respect, was with one county executive, and Bob, I don't even want to use the name. He was a friend of, I liked the gentleman, and I'm reluctant to say names because I just don't want to do that.
Understood.
But, I mean, we're kind of saying we've got a problem, but I don't know if we have a problem that's a continuing problem or it was a unique circumstance, much the same way that his untimely death was a unique circumstance. And should we try to fix something that was a unique circumstance?
Right.
What I'll say is our charter is unique when you compare it to Frederick, Howard, Montgomery, PG, and Anne Arundel, which is that our charter says within 6 months after each election, all these people have to be reappointed. That is where it is inconsistent with other counties.
And
And that's why I'm advocate, and I completely support saying, okay, get appointed once and that's it, you're in the job until you get fired or retire. I'm just saying for this line right here, other counties say, you know, the initial election, not
and the initial appointment.
The initial appointment.
the initial appointment, not within 6 months after every election. And that's what I'm advocating changing.
And the most recent and most public brouhaha involving the former county executive and most of the current county council had to do with he would not, if I recall correctly, he ignored this provision right here within 6 months after each election and did not send up for reappointment some of his directors, all of his directors. So in order to try to, I'm listening, I'm trying to do the best I can here. What I think I'm hearing is the sentence that starts within 6 months, and it goes all the way till serving deputy directors, period. If we remove that entire half a paragraph, I think that's what you're addressing. I think that's what we're attempting to address. So it would, the assistant director may remove the same deputy directors of each such department or agency. Then it would skip to the county executive shall also appoint the members of all boards and commissions, et cetera, et cetera. We would take out that first half of the top of section 413 on page C21.
Yeah, that sounds.
That's what I think we're trying to address here. What was that, Matt?
I was going to say, how's that now going to read? I'm looking back at the first sentence.
So you still appoint an officer to each department head, the director of administration, assistant director of administration. They can remove at their discretion and appoint deputy directors of each such department or agency.
Correct.
And then
The county executive.
the county, then go down to the middle of
Yep.
the county executive shall also appoint members of boards, commissions, executive, blah, 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 subject to the confirmation
Confirmation.
by the council. So
That's right. Back to
that
three.
doesn't get changed either.
That's right.
Subject to the requirements of section 315 of this charter, all employees, yada, yada, yada.
So I think, Bob, to your, this was a reaction to the way in which business was being done. And this is one of those areas that we could fix for future county executives and county councils if we did erase that middle paragraph.
Yeah, I think what it does is it brings stability to people that are trying to manage the county, and we don't end up with department head vacancies and employees kind of looking around, shuffling their feet. Saying,
Dallas, would you like to make a motion?
yes, sorry. So I will revise my motion and say, I amend my motion to remove the second sentence in its entirety of section 413, which
That's all.
starts with within 6 months.
Yep, that's all you have. Okay, is there a second for that motion?
Second.
Thank you. Discussion on the motion. Sonia?
I just want clarification of what it means. You don't need to read the paragraph, but does that mean, we're talking about at will? I know some department heads, and they're like, have to do this every 4 years, and the stability issue, so I understand that. So that takes away all of this, and no matter who the county executive is, unless there's a performance issue, that person would stay.
No, it's saying that Bob is the Director of Public Works for Wicomico County, and you're the county executive, and you just got reelected. You do not have to send Bob back to the county council to be confirmed for the job that he already has.
Okay.
That's what this is saying.
But if you came in as the new executive and you wanted to
Get rid of Bob, you may.
and hire Wayne, You could do that, but then Wayne would have to go back, would have to go before
The
council.
new choice would have to go.
Okay,
But
that's-
not the same choice.
That's what I wanted to
But
clarify.
if you were happy with Bob, he would stay.
Yeah, so he doesn't have to come back up if.
Yeah.
if-
That's
if
correct.
one-
Hold on, excuse me. Sonia? No, go ahead.
No, I was
We're
just trying
following.
to, I think
Yep.
you answered my question. I was trying to understand if you
Yep.
have a new county executive and they wanted to keep the same person, you don't have to, come back in front of
That's correct.
anybody. But, if you're reelected 2 times or whatever, you don't have to. That's
correct.
Okay. the next time. I got it.
Is what Dallas motion do what we just said? 'Cause
I think it does.
Once we see it rewritten
Yeah.
somewhere again, instead of just saying deleted, well, I like the way you said it.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think it does.
Know how it was gonna work out when they come up in black and white again.
You know, I've been reading it in my head and basically scratching out that second sentence that addresses
Yes.
the concern I was
It's
trying
gotta
to.
be written what,
Yes, sir.
the way he
He
thought.
said.
That's right, that's right.
Could we ask one of the attorneys to bring some drafting to the next meeting?
Well,
Cold in here.
sure, if that's what they're, again, there's only 3 sentences in this section. We're removing the middle sentence is all we're doing. Yes, Councilman Hastings.
Josh Hastings, County Council District 4. I apologize, I'm following along on my tiny little screen
No
here.
worries.
But other question, I don't mean to get you off track or if this is even relevant here, but let's say a particular county executive has somebody in one department and the council has approved them, and then they decide, hey, I like that person and I want to move them to, I don't know, finance or, or something like that. Is that, if they move to a different department, does it then come back to council or anything? I don't know if
They'd
that was-
have to, because that's what,
It's a new job,
That's a new
it's a new
job.
position.
I think it should, because they've got to demonstrate that
Great,
they
thank
have
you, John.
qualifications for the new
Right.
job.
I'm comfortable voting, but I'm also comfortable if we want the language to come back, I can,
can we vote and then we'll have the language ready for the revisit?
Yeah.
we've done, that's a way we've been doing things, yes.
Laura?
So, Laura?
So Wayne mentioned the possibility of contracts for the department heads. Is that something that other counties have done, Wayne? And is it something that
It's,
perhaps would
yeah,
give
it's not uncommon.
the department head more stability if they had that contract? I mean, so if a new executive came in, they would at least have some sort of severance if they were.
Yeah, it's not uncommon typically for a 6-month parachute. That's not uncommon at all, at a certain level.
Would that be in the personnel
Personnel,
section?
that's what I
Because
was
I
wondering.
didn't see,
It's a
that
great
in
question.
Yeah, that would
It's
be,
not in here. I mean, you would have to add it or perhaps to the personnel manual. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Personnel manual. is
you'd have to
being
provide
told.
for that in the personnel manual.
Thank you, Laura. We'll deal with that through personnel. Julie?
Couple things.
Yes.
I support the motion.
Okay,
And I support voting on it.
Okay.
Now without hesitating.
Okay.
Further. However, I wanted two things to say. I think that this may have come about as a warm fuzzy. After an election, you want to make sure that everybody's got buy-in on everybody who's working there, and this reappointment exercise seems to do that. Not for the employees, but for the elected officials. That's one point. The second point is, I have seen in another state where career people have the community believes that they're abusing their power because they feel like they can't be removed because they've been in there forever. So, that the other word, go ahead. You'll be gone the next election and I'll still be here kind of thing. So I think that this wording bred that goodwill after each election. But I just want to put those two things out there, maybe to further reasoning it.
Yeah, and that's
Why
why I
the
say
heck
it's
put this
perfectly
in there
good to
in the
have
first
it
place?
still maintained as an at-will employee. Because, again, there may be that public perception, but the reality is, you're at will, you can get let go at any time.
okay, so I'm going to call for the vote with the caveat that we will have Mr. Wilbur present to us the new language of Section 413 at the next meeting. All those in favor of the motion on the floor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
I'm going to abstain.
You're going to abstain? Okay, thank you, Michelle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good discussion, everyone.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
using Robert's Rules of
Yes,
Order.
sir.
Personal privilege, can we turn the heat up in here a little bit? We've got
Yes.
the
Only
freeze.
15 minutes left.
Oh, is that all? Yeah. I can stand it.
And,
Hey, you want me to get you my jacket?
yeah, so we might be able to.
No.
And Phil, as I'm sure you recall from your days sitting at this table, this HVAC system has a life of its own in this building, and we've learned that, but we'll be out of here in 15 minutes. Section 414,
It's got number 15 and 16 on it.
414, yes, there's two questions that the council wanted us to look at. The first one is in section 414, and it reads, how much time should the executive have to appoint an acting director? Should deputy directors be added to this section? The 90-day time period to serve as acting director should apply to the position and the person. The county executive must state start date so council and public know when acting appointment begins. So says a council that just appointed an acting county executive for 2.5 years. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist. That is the one, and I know that's a long one. The second one that they asked us to look at, should deputy directors be added to letter A? And should there be a time period in which the county executive must appoint a director or deputy director when a position is vacant?
What happens when you've been advertising for the better part of a year and no one will take the position because of the churn that we've seen over the past 6 years?
I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong, Wayne, and I'll use your experience. Didn't we have a revolving cycle at times where the acting director of Department X was appointed the acting director for 90 days, and then on the 89th day or the 91st day, the acting director was then made the acting director for another 90 days?
Yeah, the
Didn't
way-
we run into a little bit of that?
Yeah, the way it's set up now is that the executive has to come back to the county council.
Right.
If he wants to extend the acting status, he comes back to the county council and gives his or her reasons for it, and the council votes on it. I don't think it's broken.
Okay, you don't think section 414 is broken?
No.
Okay. My note to myself, after 2 90-day periods of acting, what is the person no longer considered acting?
To the point that Laura made earlier, we had an acting public works director
For 6 years.
because we couldn't convince anyone to take the job.
Gosh.
So when does the actual 90 days begin? Because if the county executive doesn't officially notify anyone that the 90-day period has started, no one knows
Yeah, I agree with that, Laura. There has to be,
a beginning date.
there's got to be notification to the council. Absolutely.
So that would be a change to 414. Okay. So we would need some clarity on, go ahead, Bob. Yes, sir.
I'm confused. This says section 414A says a vacancy occurs. When a vacancy occurs, don't you know when a vacancy occurs?
The council might not know that
know, Bob.
person X has quit as the head of, right? I'm seeing nods from the
I just don't understand that.
council, gets into the good governance
It
part
has to
that
do
we've
with
talked
the
about.
working relationships that were frayed.
So I guess an
I mean,
attempt,
if-
go ahead,
And I
Bob.
don't mean to belabor
No?
it, but I mean, if the public works director resigns, does that not get sent to the county council?
It does not.
It
does,
should,
but
but
it-
it has
It,
not.
it doesn't, and,
okay.
and currently, we don't even have an acting public works director. We just have a deputy.
Literally right now?
Literally.
In today's world? Okay. But you're saying, and the councilman present is acknowledging that if the Public Works Director were to quit tomorrow, the county council is not necessarily notified. Interesting.
Part of the reason we don't have an acting Public Works Director, and we'll get to this later in the charter, is that the charter requires that the Public Director, the Public Works Director, is a registered professional engineer in the state of Maryland.
Right.
I wholeheartedly support, and I'll have,
No.
I have good explanations for why
Noted.
that should remain.
We'll get to that. Is there a fix?
Yeah, do we put a notice in that when a vacancy occurs,
The council,
council shall be advised within 30 days, 15 days?
would you propose that as a new letter, A, B, C, or a new sentence in, it seems to me that might be a new letter, a brand new procedures instituted. You could say when a vacancy or absence occurs, the county
You
executive
could just
should.
add and say when the vacancy occurs, a position, the county executive shall immediately notify the county council, comma, and appoint.
I would.
Or C.
I would say that instead of immediately, the county executive must notify the county council in writing within 10 days.
Yeah, that's reasonable.
That'd work.
I don't want to beat a dead horse, but Section C says, procedures instituted when a vacancy or absence that warrants a temporary appointment occurs, the county executive shall ensure that the appropriate procedures are immediately instituted, to provide a qualified person for the position. So the charter already deals with this. You're just saying it's not being followed.
It's not, it hasn't been followed consistently, Bob.
The county executive shall ensure that the appropriate procedures, which are, okay,
The appropriate procedure.
there aren't
Yeah,
appropriate
that's it.
procedures.
It doesn't really define what the appropriate procedures are.
And that's maybe
I
what we're
think
trying
that's
to
where
do.
the,
Okay, here's what
Comes
we're,
back to good governance
here's what we're going to do.
and good intentions.
We're gonna, yes, I know, thank you, that's what we're about to do, thank you, Catherine. We are coming back to 414C, that is where we begin the next meeting. Have some thought between now and then. Bless you, somebody. And
I'm
with,
not opposed to doing.
No,
what
I
you're
understand.
suggesting. I
Nope.
just don't understand the necessity.
well, again, we have some weird things going on, but to Phil's point, do we necessarily address them because we've noted? I hope the public who's paying any attention to this understands what a quandary we are in a little bit. So with that, we will call our discussion at the table. I will thank everyone for tonight, and we will open the floor to public comments at this point in time. Mr. Public, welcome. Hello, Mr. Taylor.
Robert Taylor. A couple things, going back to Mr. Olson's presentation, I was astounded that no one asked him why, when they had their charter review in Frederick, I think it was last year, they didn't increase the salary for the county executive, which in Frederick County, I think is $95,000. And that is a segue into my position that to increase the minimum salary in the charter for the county executive to anything more than, let's just say, 100,000 discussion is really ridiculous. I've sent you a memo. When you look at the economic data from the other counties and look at what they pay, and you eliminate the big four, as was suggested tonight, you don't find anything like $120,000. Yes, Mr. Strasburg, I understand the CPI went up for all of us. Didn't go up just for the county executive. The average person in Wicomico County, inflation adjusted, has no more buying power than they did in 2006. So, I mean, to say, well, we're just going to increase his or her salary is absurd, in my opinion, to be perfectly frank. Possibly some increase, but when you look at what happens in counties like ours, you don't see anything like that. Frederick, I've just mentioned. Cecil, another example, they pay a little bit more, $98,000. Both of those counties have a lot more wealth, no matter how you measure it, in terms of assessed value, in terms of income per capita, property tax per capita, much higher. Frederick in particular, it's one of the, getting into the bottom of the wealthiest counties in the state. We're way down. We're maybe not next to the bottom, but we're not far from it.
We're 23rd.
Well, in some measures.
let's keep
In
comments.
other measures,
Excuse
we're
me,
a little
everybody.
higher. Depends on which way you
Mr.
cut it.
Taylor and Mr. Stranwayne, please direct your comments
Yeah.
to the committee, and committee, let's.
I am. I mean,
And
he has a-
let's,
he has a
understood.
good- He has a
We're
good point about
We're
the
good.
CPI, but it
We're good.
affects us all.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Please
and,
continue.
So anyway, that, as I say, that was a segue into that point. Going into the other matters that you discussed tonight, 407, 408, 410, 412, I think the idea of workshopping it is a good idea, and probably for all of those sections. Filling the vacancy, I do have some notes from last summer when I was the council's attorney about what they do in other counties. I think I may still have those, and I'll be glad if I can find them to send them to you. As far as the physical mental disability, really to remove that standard would leave it totally open-ended. I do think, however, there are some things that need to be addressed in that. For example, the 6-month provision. Does that mean that the person has to be actually physically or mentally disabled for 6 months before he or she can be removed? Or perhaps, if they're in a coma and to a medical certainty it's going to last for 6 months, can they be removed before then? I mean, it's a practical question that could come up, and I think that should be addressed. And I agree with the suggestion that you need a medical opinion. That only makes sense. As far as temporary absence or disability, I think there needs to be a notification provision, just like if a department head leaves, as was discussed just a few minutes ago. The council, and in fact the public, should be advised about that, and not just leave it up. That's the way it is when the president's disabled, when the governor's disabled, and it's a very standard methodology. Director of Administration residency requirement. I don't disagree with the requirement generally, but I would suggest, and some counties do this, that the Director of Administration has to become a county resident if he or she isn't within, say, 6 months, 9 months, a year, whatever. I think a year is, well, probably that's a little too long. Let's say 6 months. Because they have to find a home, and go through the process. That's about it for tonight, but I would suggest that you look at all of those provisions really in more detail, because I think more consideration is needed of the points that I've mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Any thoughts from the group? Otherwise, I will say thank you all for your discussion, your attention tonight. Our next meeting is June the 17th. Laura, this is our new permanent home, correct? And that means that Doug gets to start eating dinners at 3 o'clock on the meeting dates. That's the only downside of these 5 o'clock meetings, but other than that, 5 o'clock seems to work better. So thank you, everyone, for good discussion tonight, and have a great evening. We're adjourned. Thank you.